and so we help them learn. Welcome to Libertarian Counterpoint. I am your host, James Just. With me here today is John Kabateck from the National Federation of Independent Businesses. And we were going to get back to you in a second, but our roving reporter, Mr. Richard Fields, is in Europe this week, and he's got an interesting discussion on the dangers of escalation. And we would like to have, just off the top of the thing, get this out the way. So, Mr. Fields, take it away.
Richard Fields reporting from Helsinki, Finland, the newest member of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. Finland, a country that maintained neutrality since the end of World War II, applied for and was accepted for NATO membership within weeks of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. In the last 3 weeks, I have visited Krakow, Poland, and seen Oskar Schindler's factory, and Auschwitz and Birkenau, the concentration camps where millions of Jews were killed by the Nazis. I saw the Jewish ghetto in Warsaw and the KGB headquarters in Vilnius, Lithuania, where thousands of Lithuanian patriots were imprisoned, brutally interrogated, and shipped off to near certain starvation in the Siberian labor camps, or shot in the convenient KGB on-site execution chamber. Same story, different details in Latvia and Estonia. The Finns fought a brutal winter war against the Soviets. They lost territory but were able to avoid becoming a vassal state to the Soviet Union. The Baltic state citizens who rode railroad cattle cars to Siberian labor camps were replaced by Russians. Many of their descendants are still here. Same story in Ukraine. One of Putin's talking points for the invasion of Ukraine is the protection of those Russian-speaking Ukrainians. The fear that they will be next on Russia's invasion list is palpable among Poles, Lithuanians, Latvians, Estonians, and Finns. Understandably, there is also an almost childlike faith that NATO will defend them. To their credit, these countries are all spending the 2% on GNP on defense that is a condition of NATO membership. Many of the NATO members of Western and Southern Europe are not. But the elephant in the NATO room is the United States. To say that the U.S. is militarily overextended is an understatement. We have formal or implied commitments to defend Israel, Taiwan, and many other countries in addition to Ukraine. Our financial warfare against Russia, Iran, and other countries is eroding our dollar as the world's reserve currency. Contrary to what the White House and the lapdog U.S. media are saying, Ukraine is not winning the war against Russia. It's a stalemate at best. The CIA support during the Obama administration given to the 2014 coup in Ukraine that overthrew a regime sympathetic to Russia is coming back to haunt us. Let's hope that the bite does not lead to the escalation of war to the nuclear level. Reporting from the fields, I'm Richard Fields. See you next week.
Thank you, Richard. All right, John, we're just going to move right back on because Richard is off on a trip, and so sometimes his reports don't match what our discussion is. So the NFIB, who is the NFIB, and what's your role in that?
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. I really appreciate being here. And the National Federation of Independent Business is a wonderful organization, actually California-born about 80 years ago this year, 2023, by a guy who was a small business owner who really felt that small businesses needed to have a voice, not just in California, but in every state and across the nation. He was a member of the United States Chamber of Commerce even back then in 1943, and he said, wait a minute. We need to have an organization that specifically talks to small business and really addresses the small business issues. And on any given issue, small businesses are affected in a very disproportionate way. All job creators are good, don't get me wrong, but small businesses needed a voice. So we're 80 years strong. Today we have about 14,000 members here in California, about 350,000 nationwide, and our mission is quite simple, just to protect the right of small business owners to own, operate, and grow their small business. And as you know, here in the Golden State, sometimes not so Golden State, that is not easy. So
Yeah.
we're proud to be here and appreciate it.
Yeah, it's a very difficult. I was talking with a friend of mine last week, who was trying to create a studio for his he's a photographer and he's just trying to create a studio, and just the number of rules and laws, and he said it's mind-boggling. How is anybody supposed to get through this? And so we're glad that people like you are there to speak for them. And what's your role in the NFIB? You're the president of the California chapter, is that what it was?
Yeah, I'm proud to be the California State Director of the NFIB. We have a presence in every single state capital, and we really advocate at the state and federal level only. I mean, we recognize, and I think our founder realized, there's a lot of great organizations locally, and we do partner often with local groups, but our focus is state and federal, and that is a never-ending effort from us. And it's funny, when I first started the job, I remember being up in Northern California, and there was a guy who owned a machine shop, and you just said the taxes, the regulations, the lawsuits. I said, sir, with all of that stuff, it must be like swimming upstream. And he grabbed me by the shoulder and he said, son, in peanut butter.
Yeah.
It's like swimming in peanut butter upstream. I said, okay, I see that visual.
And some people are good at navigating that kind of bureaucracy and others aren't. And so it seems to me you're creating an unlevel playing field, right? Those who can participate in, who can navigate that kind of cluster, we'll say, have an advantage for those of us who find bureaucracy a task or stressful. It's like some of us with anxiety. Dealing with a bureaucrat, it can be an anxiety-ridden thing.
So true, and so many, they like that gentleman up in Northern Cal, but they own little restaurants, little bakeries, hardware stores, toy stores. There are little neighborhood stores, but these people are so busy running their own business, they don't have time to keep an eye on everything that's coming at them. And our policymakers load them up with way too much for them to handle, and frankly for them to understand. So we come in and make sure they're getting that voice, but they're also making sure that we're keeping their doors open and helping that.
One of the things I've always said is we are held accountable to all these laws, but there's so many laws that, how can you know them all? And so what's the thing? It's ignorance of the law is no excuse, but how can you be anything but ignorant when they're literally passing thousands of laws every year? It's literally impossible for you to not be ignorant. So we're going to sit here, cover some bad bills here for a minute.
Yeah.
So is there any one of these that you have, the bad bills that got passed? What's the worst ones on the top of your head?
Yeah, there are some doozies out there. I think there's one that really kind of concerns us, and we kind of think it's the camel's nose under the tent. There's a bill that Governor Newsom signed that was headed to be referended, was headed to be overturned by the voters in 2024. But there ended up being a deal cut and being smoke and mirrors. And what it would have done, and what we think it will do actually moving forward, it will actually allow an unelected panel of bureaucrats and union leaders to determine and dictate the benefits and the wages and other circumstances of fast food franchises in California. Now, the reason people would say, well, that's not all small businesses, but the concern is that what was done here is it's going to create, for the first time ever in the United States, a panel to dictate what a small business owner's wages, benefits, and all of the other circumstances in their workplace that they founded and created. And we have no question in our mind that this is actually something that will then lead to service stations, automotive repair, farms, other levels of retail. We just think that this bill is a bad one. And what happened was it was going to be overturned by the voters, we think, with a referendum next year that was placed by the franchisees and others. And at the end of the day, this is where we saw some of corporate America, but also the labor unions get together behind closed doors, and small business was left out. And James, that is a big problem. So we really, we think that's a real nasty bill. And so that's just one of many that, again, we see the exercising of union influence when they only represent about 17% of all workers in California.
Oh, don't get me started. I was a gig worker a few years ago when the whole AB5 went down. I actually ran for office because of AB5. My fellow gig workers asked me to run for office to try to do something, right? They knew it wasn't going to be, but can we at least try? Yeah, okay. I spent $1,500 and I got 29%. That's 50,000 votes in the district I was in. It's only $1,500. So, and that's a question. It brings up a question that's going to dive a little bit. Do you guys, in part of your process, do you speak for the gig worker, who is actually the most small business, right? The gig worker works for themselves. So do you try to represent gig workers?
Sure, and we had a real problem. We strenuously opposed AB 5, and we think that is, again, one really terrible. I was going to say disgusting, but it really is a terrible type of law right there. But we absolutely represent those gig workers because they're entrepreneurs. These are the people who are the single moms, the seniors looking for some extra income, the student that's just kind of making his way or her way through college, but just some of these everyday Americans. And the problem we had with that mandated employee versus independent contractor law was that it really did say, look, your entrepreneurial freedom, your ability to exercise your day, your way of life, and your ability to run and feed your family is now got to be under the union influence. And so we absolutely love and support those union workers. We opposed AB 5 because we think it's un-American, we think it's un-Californian, and at the end of the day, it's really boxing most gig drivers who tell me, and I'm sure you remember this, look, I want my freedom. I don't want to be boxed into.
I didn't want to be an employee. If I wanted to be an employee, I would have gone to UPS or one of those other places and become an employee. There's lots of places. I wasn't incompetent. I was making a deliberate choice to have freedom in my schedule.
And the real best thing about NFIB, I should also add, is that we ballot our members. We don't have about 10 people who are on a board that sit in a little room and decide what's best for the 14,000 members here or 300,000 nationwide. We actually put out to our members member ballots, and we ask them, what issues are important to you, and what position do you want us to take? And we're really proud of that democratic, lowercase d, democratic process of making sure that the actual member's voice and their position is represented.
Okay, so now wage controls, which anybody who goes through history knows wage controls don't work, right? So the wage control bill is bad, and it's going to have, and I think you're right, the fast food restaurant is it's the canary in the coal mine. If they can get this one through, if we can accept this, then it will be everywhere before too long. We will have your wages will be mandated by the government, and so there's no way that's going to end up in the long term end up in a good place. So what else do we have that's bad bills that we've got working on?
Yeah, well, some bad bills that actually are moving forward.
Bad bills that are now law, I guess, is the.
Well, and it's funny. There was a mixed bag with this governor. I actually have had a saying lately, which has been, he opposed some really bad stuff that we're pleased that never saw the light of day, and he signed some really bad stuff that did see the light of day. So I actually have this saying, which is, you win some, you lose some. You're not sure with Newsom.
Well, this is true. You're not sure with Newsom.
There were a couple other doozies. I think one that is an Assembly constitutional amendment that is actually filed now with the Secretary of State is going to authorize a city or a county now to basically levy a tax on the development or building and construction of infrastructure projects, affordable housing, but it's going to require the levying of a tax if approved by 55% of the voters. The problem we have with that is California is already the highest tax state in the nation. Corporate, statewide sales, income tax, gas tax, you name it. And what Californians are saying on both the left and the right and the middle is we're tired of being taxed. So this is just one more thing that's headed for the ballot next year that we're disappointed the governor signed, which again is just an unnecessary levy, or they want to call it a levy, a tax assessment. There's a thesaurus for all kinds of costs. But that's another one that's a bad bill that we saw move forward. And then you talked about wages. The governor also did sign a bill that will increase the minimum wage for workers, any employees or workers on a health care campus in California. Now, this probably came out of the whole COVID pandemic, and these healthcare workers need better wages. But what we're seeing is, again, it's the camel's nose. And what we're seeing, though, is it's going to raise the minimum wage up to as much as $23, we think as high as $25 per hour. And the problem is it's not just healthcare workers. Now you've got vendors who provide businesses. They have retail stores, little restaurants, little vendors. Anybody that exists and subsists on a healthcare campus or a facility in California is now going to see their employees' minimum wage go up. All at a time when small business owners just can't afford it.
And it's not just small business owners. As I've said here many, many times, the end consumer pays all costs. And so all these costs will get passed on. And whether they're going to get passed on, they're going to get passed on in your health insurance premiums. They're going to get passed on your health care bills. And These people seem to think that someone else is going to pay this cost, and no, the person who can't pass it on is the one who pays it, and that person is the wage employee, and the small businesses who have to balance that notion. Well, if I raise my prices, I'm going to lose customers, so I'm going to have to lose some profit. But if I lose profit, I have to close down, and so you were putting more and more people in a stuck position in California where you're literally just stuck. Where what am I going to do? And which is why a lot of people are leaving.
And you're doing the most harm. They are doing the most harm, big labor, to the very individuals, the men and women who they think they're helping the most, which are the entry-level, low-wage employees. And again, we actually call upon every employer to do the right thing. Give every employee a visible pathway to success and to growth, but give them a way that they can earn that. I think that when we start looking at calculated kind of government-created wage processes, that actually takes the incentive out of anybody to actually work hard for that next level. But we do think employers, should show everybody a pathway for success. But people should earn that. It shouldn't be government instituted, which actually ends up hurting the very people.
Well, and high entry-level wages actually make it hard for businesses to take a risk on somebody, right? Yeah. You can't take a risk if you $10 an hour, you might be able to take a risk with somebody, but at $25 an hour, you can't take a risk. You can't afford the risk. And because it's not just the wage, it's the taxes on the wages, right? Because you're paying taxes on your wages. So when you raise the minimum wage, they're not just the wage you're paying, it's the taxes and everything associated with that wage that also goes up.
Yeah.
So I always think these minimum wage increases are always a backhanded tax increase. That's kind of the way I view at it. It's a backhanded tax increase. They're taxing the average person's labor without actually saying it.
Yeah, so. And there's a perception amongst, I think, a lot of policymakers here in our capital who really think that the small business owners actually are just extremely wealthy and have this money at their disposal, and they just don't. A gentleman who passed away this past year, a great successful local entrepreneur, Chris Yarosh, who owned Broderick Restaurant and some others here, or others in the Sacramento region. I remember him telling me when we were dealing with the Sacramento minimum wage, he said, policymakers just don't get it. They actually think that most of us small business owners are walking out the front door on a red carpet into our Bentley to go to our home, to our mansion. And we're usually going off the side broken door, getting into our busted little Acura and going home to like our little apartment because we're trying to make ends meet.
Because, well, for the average entrepreneur, they're the ones that get paid last. Their employees have to get paid first. It's literally the law, right?
It is the law.
If you don't pay your first, if you pay yourself and you don't pay your employees, you're going to jail, or or at least paying a huge fine, right?
That's true.
And so it's these entrepreneurs. Again, they're not. Sometimes, when they make it big, they make it big. But most small businesses, they're not huge. They make, $70, $90, $100,000. That's what they take home, just like everybody else. Mm-hmm. After all is said and done, they may have $1 million of revenue, but it doesn't mean they brought home $1 million, right? That's the revenue.
That's right.
They may even have a huge profit, but that profit gets cycled back into the business because that's how you grow. And so unless you're a cash cow business, which most entrepreneurs aren't a cash cow business, it's, you work a lot of hours, 60, 70, 90 hours a week, and you don't get paid $25 an hour for that.
That's right.
What you get paid is satisfaction and freedom and all those various other, the ancillary benefits of being able to control your own life. I have one here that I want to talk about because it confused me. There's AB 647, the bill that requires grocery store employees to rehire the old things. This again goes back to talk about how is a small business, if you're a single grocery store, you say you find, hey, I want to go, that grocery store closed. I've always wanted to run a grocery store. I'm going to go open a grocery store. But now you've got all these things. I've got to look at the previous employers and go try to hire the
Where does it stop? Where does it stop? Again, our politicians think that they know how to run a business, and most of them have not signed the front of a check. They know how to sign the back. They just haven't signed the front of a check. Now, this one is a nasty bill because actually, and it was signed into law, which actually would say that if you are the successor or the person who's taking over the grocery business in California, that for 120 days after that establishment is fully operational, and you need to make sure that you are actually keeping those employees and making that list of those employees, and you must hire from that list of employees, even if those employees are not ones that fit the bill according to your management management model, you now must be, or actually might have even had some issues or challenges or problems.
They may have been the ones to cause the problems in the first place.
Might have been the reason the business had problems in the first place or was handed over. But for that 120 days, at least 120 days, that employer must hire or be required to first look and hire from that list, or be subject to liability or fines or penalties. Again, it's an example of our policymakers thinking, my gosh, well, we must absolutely hold these bad small business owners and ethnic business owners accountable, when actually what they're trying to do is create a really good model for their community, create jobs. They're not trying to put people out of work, but they should be entitled to make the decisions on their own as that entrepreneur and as that business owner who knows what's best for that business.
And so is the solution for that is to allow the grocery store to close, leave it closed for 6 months, a year before you reopen it again? Does that even solve the problem?
It's insane to do that. It's absolutely. Now again, that not only does that do a disservice to the workers that are deserved to kind of continue to work, the employer, the small business owner, but it does a disservice to the community. What I think they tend to don't understand, but hopefully saw through COVID, is when a small business shuts down, it's not just that small business and a few jobs. It's the community tax base. It's the community resources, public safety, schools, healthcare, even union dollars. Because when those small business dollars aren't feeding the tax base at the state or local level, you've got a community that's now suffering and struggling. So no, we shouldn't shut it down. We should leave that in the hands of the rightful small business owner. And as you said, there are state employment and industrial relations laws that employers must be held accountable by. But this is an example of government politicians thinking they know what's best for Main Street.
Yeah, this is not making sure employees aren't abused or they're not being taken advantage of. This is dictating hiring policy on individual businesses. And that's an intervention that leads to bad places in history, right? Once you start down that path, that you end up in very disturbing places.
Yeah, a woman who owned a bookstore in the Davis area said, and she passed away a couple years ago herself, but it was the Avid Reader bookstore, and it's also one here down in Sacramento and one in Davis. But she said to me years ago, she said, I opened my bookstore so it could be a community center, a place that people could come, read books, do things for the schools, help provide jobs. I didn't open my small business so that federal litigators could come in and mediate and dictate every element of my small business that I created. But this is the mindset we're seeing more and more in California, and frankly across the country in many places, that we need to change.
Okay, well, and I wonder how much of this is actually to get more union members, because you need government employees to run these things, to run these programs, to oversee these things, and who are government employees are the one place where union membership is growing. Yeah. So there's always a back end of it. So we've got like 4 minutes left. Is there one or two bills you'd like to highlight one or two laws we'd like to highlight before we get out of here today?
Well, on the good front?
On the bad front. We covered good last week.
Yeah, well, I'd say on the one thing I really want to talk about is crime. Property crime. Okay. One of the things that's really disappointing, and that we call upon, both your viewers, I think we ask everybody to really make their voices heard, is we got to get more stuff done when it comes to retail and property crimes. We had 17 bills in last year's session that never made it out, both by Democrats and Republicans, both that included accountability and also diversion programs, rehabilitation programs for the criminals. None of them made it out of committee. This last year we had 8 or 9 of them. None of them made it out. The only one that was close to making it out was a study bill to study the impact of property crimes, and we saw that bill actually fizzle out. So it's actually really disappointing, and now these crimes are escalating to violent crimes. So I think what we saw this last year were bills that actually would have reformed Prop 47, which increased the value of property from $450 to $950 to be considered a felony, to be considered a crime. And that is just what it's done, is basically giving criminals the ability to thumb their nose at the law. And then on top of that, we aren't seeing much resources going locally with law enforcement. So I think one area that we really feel was real bad bad bills, I would say it wasn't necessarily bad bills, but it was bad action by our legislature, was the inaction. I think sometimes it can be a bad bill, but I think sometimes it can just be bad legislators that aren't acting on anything to help fix a bad problem. And
Yeah,
so
this problem with theft and shoplifting, and it's become no longer about shoplifting or even theft. It's now organized crime, and we're not even dealing with that really as organized crime. And it's the social disintegration that we have seen since 2020, since the whole COVID lockdowns. I don't think we can separate those two. I think the whole disintegration of our communities. We had businesses close, and when businesses close, you know, your community loses the roots, and you know, and then what happens when soil loses its roots, right? A storm or a stream can wash a bunch of
Absolutely.
a bunch of the topsoil away, and that's what we're looking at now. We've kind of brushed all the topsoil away that created that comfortable walking path that we all had for society, and now we're looking at our society, and it looks like it's collapsing. We have legislatures who wanting to protect the rights of, I don't want to say criminals, protect the rights of people who are accused of committing crimes, but they're not wanting to protect the rights of the business owners or the public who have the right to, you know, not have their possessions stolen, or to walk down the streets without worrying about, you know, are you going to be mugged? Is your car going to be broken into? You know,
I do hold out hope. I do hold out hope in that area that really we are seeing some change there. I do think that we've seen some district attorneys like Chesa Boudin in San Francisco who was recalled because folks on the left and the right said, look, enough is enough. We have businesses leaving. We have people getting shot and assaulted during these actual property crimes. And we're just seeing our communities dwindling to nothing. So I think more voices on, again, not a Republican, Democrat issue. It's all sides of the aisle. Libertarians, others are rising up and saying, look, enough is enough. We need to protect our community and help get California moving again.
Okay. So, John, where can people find out about the NFIB? Where can they find out?
Sure. You can find us online at www.nfib.com. There is a California page if people want to find out what we're doing here, but certainly get involved. I think the most important thing is, as a small business owner, make sure your voice is heard.
We are out of time. Thank you, John. Thank you for watching. Thank you for being here. Good night, and please remember to love everybody. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.